Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it is in honor and memory of Rab Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rab Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz Olav Hashalom, Rab Yoel HaKoyen Khan Olav Hashalom. It's also on schus and a merit of Rab Zev Yecheskel HaKoyen and Risha Katz, La'edich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis, for many long, healthy years. So, my friends, we're coming out to the end and conclusion of Perek Yud of Tanya, which concludes with a brackets that comes to synergize, if you wish, to connect the two interpretations in Bnei Aliyah that we learned about last week. So let's first sum up the two interpretations. So the Alter Rebbe was explaining the Gemara in Sukkah that talks about the tzaddikim, the 18,000 tzaddikim, and he calls that the tzaddik she'ene gamur. There are many different levels, as he explained what distinguishes one level from the next. And then there's what Rashbi says, I've seen the elevated ones, men of elevation, elevated men, and there are few. Also a few levels. And he explained what the word Bnei Aliyah means. That this is referring to the Tzaddik Gomer, the Tzaddik V'Tevlei. And Aliyah for two reasons. First reason, because they're Maila, they elevate, they transform darkness to light. And the second Aliyah, because their work is toward Aliyah, toward Tzedek Gaveya, for above. They're serving the above. There's no personal gain at all. There's no personal interest at all. Complete dedication to that which is above. Complete selflessness. And as he brought the proof for it from several different places, in order to draw the Shechina down below and make a dira b'tachtenim. And like the Zohar, Re'ayim Hemnin, Parshas Seitzei says, Kibrod yishtadl basar avei, like a son who exerts himself for his father and his mother, more than for himself and for his own spirit, nefesh, ruach, and neshama. No, it's not just for his own body, but even his nefesh, ruach, and neshama, like we discussed, that he even gives up his own spirit, his own soul, his own spiritual interests, to the point that he sacrifices himself, Moser Garmei, to death, to save his parents. And that is the Bnei Aliyah. So now comes a bracket. At the end of Perek Yud comes the Alter Rebbe. Remember, we've been talking about Tzaddik Gomer and Tzaddik V'Tevlei. Tzaddik Gomer is referring to his absolute love, or like he put it here, absolute commitment and selflessness to the divine. Tzaddik V'Tevlei is the transformation of everything to V'Tev, to good. So both in the Sur Merah, he's a Bnei Aliyah. And Nasei Tev. Sur Merah doesn't mean there's evil. It means the transformation of anything negative has been totally transformed. And Nasei Tev in the positive, in his absolute love and commitment and selflessness. So now, he explains that actually they're interdependent. And this is the end of the Perek. So what does the Alter Rebbe say? V'shneim elim b'kona echad. And both these interpretations, and both these dynamics, and both these elements in the elevated men in the Bnei Aliyah work in tandem, in synergy with each other. The Kana Echad means like they go together in one path, one Kana, one line. That means they're not two separate types of service. They're actually all part of one approach. If you recall, what did he say? How does a person, a tzaddik gomer, why does he reject and despise? Like he says, sinna and mirs, despise and completely repulsed by anything negative because he's deep love for the divine. So it's interconnected. When you love something so deeply, you reject everything that's its opposite. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to explain in a more Kabbalistic language, but the similar idea that these two approaches of the Bnei Aliyah, the transformation of darkness to light, and serving God selflessly, where it's completely dedicated to godliness and nothing else, are kana echad. Which means that the ability to draw down the Shekhinah, Kudshe Bricha v'Shekhinah and Tachteinim, is dependent on the Aveda of elevating to the negative to the positive. So the first interpretation of Bnei Aliyah brings on the second interpretation. You could say also the other way around. That when you're completely selflessly dedicated, that causes the total transformation of the negative. If it's not completely selflessly, then there's still some trace. So both directions. The Bnei Aliyah of complete dedication and selflessness without any self involved brings the Bnei Aliyah, the Aliyah of the transformation of everything negative into positive. There's no room for any, not just no opposition, but everything has been transformed. And the same thing, when you transform the negative to the positive, the enemy has become an ally in the city that was conquered by the king, called the divine soul, then it's also completely, then you're drawing down the Kudshe Bricha v'Shekhinah down below in B'Tachteinim, and you're doing chesed with conscious delay, with your nest, with the divine, fulfilling God's purpose. So here's what the Alter Rebbe says. For by the means of the process of refinement from klippas nega, which is the radiant klippa, shell. And let's go back and explain what that means. We're going back now to the chapter 6 and 7, where he spoke about birurim, especially in chapter 7. So let's clarify. We learned that in this world, the divine energy is concealed in the husks, in shells, like fruit within a shell. So the fruit is like the divine energy, but it's covered up in a shell. There are different levels of shell. Sholosh klippas hatmei is completely asur v'kosher b'idei achitzenim, off limits. Thick shells that we're not supposed to enter there altogether. Klippas nega is all the neutral things in this world. Kosher foods, kosher activities, but it's still material, meaning it's matter within which is embedded sparks. In the language of Kabbalah, Avedus HaBirurim means, birur means to clarify, to separate, and to extract and draw out these sparks, to draw out the fruit from the husk and elevate it to godliness. That's the Aveda. The Birurim, Shemevarim Nega. Why is it called Nega? Because it's a shell, but it's a translucent one. It means it's somewhat radiant, it shines. Like, for example, let's say take the peel of a grape, or something that's a very thin membrane. So there is a shell, but it's not completely concealing, let's say, of a nut, a walnut, or a filbert, or a coconut, where the shell completely conceals that which is within. So here it's mevarim menega. We have the power to do that. It still work, because when you eat, let's say, a meal, as he explained, you could eat and indulge, God forbid, or you can eat l'shem shemayim to extract the sparks toward getting the strength to learn Torah, as we explained back in chapters 6 and 7. So now he's saying, so that's the process called refinement, birurim. So when you do that, what are you achieving? You're taking out from the husk, which on its own could technically fall into the category, at least temporary, of negative energy, ra, but you're elevating. So when you do that, mailim mayin nukfin, you elevate mailim from the word aliyah, like you said before, the maila the cheshach ta'ir, the maila the ra l'toiv. That was the first interpretation in Bnei Aliyah. So let's go back to the words that he used. Mahapchin ara mailim esel l'kedusha. You're elevating them to holiness. You're elevating the klippa, the negative. In Kabbalistic language, it's called man, halos man. You sometimes see that acronym. Man is an acronym for Mayin Nukfin. What's Mayin Nukfin? Feminine waters. Mayin in Aramaic is like Mayim. Mayin with a nun. Mem Yud Yud Nun is like the waters. And Nukfin is Nukfa, feminine. The feminine waters are elevated. What does that mean? In the language of Chassidus, you have Arasusa Dilatata. When the awakening and the effort is initiated from below, it's called feminine energy, feminine waters. Hamshachas Mad, by contrast, means the transmission of Mayin Tchurin. The waters, the masculine waters. Masculine here means the mashpia. Sometimes a good comparison for the two is the moon and the sun. The moon is like feminine, malchus. It receives, from the bottom up, it receives and absorbs sunlight. The mashpia zoh is shemesh, is the sun. Mayin tchurin, the masculine, that's mashpia, that transmits. That's hasusa de le'ela. That's when they say this is coming from above. And here he's saying that when a person does these birurim, and we're talking now that Tzaddik Gamur does it completely, because he transforms completely. Remember the people in the city, the Bnei Ir Ktana, that even those that were enemies have become now complete allies. So what is he doing? He's mailim mayim nukfim. Feminine waters are being elevated. In the language of Gemara, that when you initiate from below and you sanctify yourself through your effort, God will sanctify you from above. So that's Hamlaos Mayin Nukfin. Okay. Now the Alter Rebbe continues. Once we've established that, Mayin Nukfin, V'nasim Yechudim Elyenim. V'nasim Yechudim Elyenim. This process elevates the feminine waters, meaning the asusa l'tata, the initiative from below. So something happens. In other words, when the spark is trapped inside the husk, inside the shell, that's existence as we know it. It's not negative, it's not positive. That's the way God created the world. Klipa shemer lepri, in the words of the Shalah. The husk, the shell, protects the fruit. It's neutral. Now what happens next? The next step is that we take and extract that spark and use it for the positive. You're making a birur. And what happens? You initiate something, and energy flows upward. That's called Mayin Nukfin. That's the energy of the feminine waters. But it continues. V'nasim yechudim elyenim. It doesn't just flow upward. This causes supernal unions. That's what Yechudim Elyenim means. Higher unifications. This is what Kabbalah calls Yechudim Elyenim, because you're now unifying things. Because as long as there was still a dissonance between shell and fruit, between spark, the divine spark, and existence, so you don't have a yichud. Once you've identified and said, this object, this food, or this physical object is meant to be used, l'shem shemayim, for the divine purpose, you've created, you aligned existence with its purpose. So think of it this way. Imagine having a narrative, a book, and someone scatters the pages and the pieces of the book all over the place. So we don't have the unifying narrative and story. But then when you gather them together, and each of us is allocated our individual sparks, when you gather them together, you're now elevating them and joining them together like a jigsaw puzzle, and you're creating a yichud. So this yichud creates yichudim elyenim, not just a yichud below, but also yichudim elyenim, supernal unions. And when those unions happen, what happens? When things are united, they draw energy. Think of a human being. When a body's working in a very healthy way, everything is seamless, a seamless flow. But if, God forbid, there's some blockage or obstacle, you don't have that flow. But through our birurim, which causes the halos man, feminine waters, and create the yichudim elyenim, now the entity is completely in a place, eres bekalim, energies in containers, that the flow is perfect. And what does it do? That draws laherid mayin tchurin. So this is the response of the Asusa Delayla, God's response to our work to cause and to draw down the masculine waters. So look how many things have happened here. We have done the birurim. That in turn initiates and generates the feminine waters to go upward, to create unifications, which in turn, laherid mayin tchurin, to be drawn downward. So it's like midah keneged midah, tit for tat, that our efforts have cause and effect, or action and reaction, that our work from below and transforming in turn draws down below the masculine waters. And what are these masculine waters, he says? Sheheim heim meimei hachsodim shebechol mitzvah meramach mitzvah sesa. These energies, these are nothing other, meheim heim. What are they? They're nothing other than the waters of kindness. Meimei achsidim. The waters of kindness, because remember, chesed compares to water. But here's more of the masculine waters, the mashpia, chesed of Zah, of the mashpia, within each of the 248 positive mitzvahs, which we know correspond, mitzvah sesa, the 248 mitzvah sesa correspond to chesed. And each mitzvah is considered a kindness, because firstly, it creates kindness and it draws down the kindness from above. That's the idea of the masculine waters. Like the Rab Chaim Vital explains in Shara Mitzvahs, he says that water also plays a role that it expels negative energy, klippus. They manifest through gvura. So when mitzvahs, which are, like he says, the chsadim that are there in every mitzvah, that in turn draws down the divine into existence. And here we go. For all the mitzvahs are expressions of kindness and the masculine waters. Mayin tchurim. Tahainu, what does that mean? Hamshachas gedushas ha'elokusi is baruch mamayil lamata. In that they cause the heavenly divine energy to be manifest below, lislapish betachtenim, and to become dressed in the lowly substance of this world. Commotion is boyer b'mokem acher, as explained elsewhere, which is in the chapters in Tanya, Chav Gimel, Lamed Hey, and Lamed Zayin. And this now brings together both interpretations. Because you have here the effort of Bnei Aliyah, transforming darkness to light, which is the Avedus HaBirurim, of elevating the spark. The spark that was what? That was trapped in a negative place, and potentially could even be more negative. You elevated it, and what happened as a result? As a result of that, you drew down the Mayim Tchurin to bring the Shechina, the Shechina and Tachtenim, all the way below. which are the mitzvahs, which is the hamshach b'chinas chsadim mayim tchurim. You bring down kedushas elokusei, the holiness of the divine. Which is the focus of the second interpretation of Bnei Aliyah, that the entire focus is only Aliyah, Gavoya. Like we said before, that his whole purpose is to bring down the Shechina in Tachtenim, the Kudshe Bricha v'Shechina in Tachtenim, the Schasidim Keinei. So you have the connection of these two things. Now you could ask the question, 1 second. What he just said in the brackets is for every mitzvah that we do, for every good deed that we do. Every Avodas HaBerurim does this, even if you're not a tzaddik. So Eino Chanami. But a tzaddik, remember, doesn't just know about it, doesn't just dedicate himself. He embodies, he's the personification of these two steps. Total transformation of the negative, total birurim, and total dedication to Gavoya, to the Aliyah, to Bnei Aliyah, to Hashem, Hashem's purpose in this world. So he embodies these two things in the fullest sense of the word. But indeed, the fact is it could be applied to every person in their Aveda where they bring these two elements together. And as we've said, even though this Pedic is talking about the tzaddik, but every one of us has a certain me'ain, a certain element of this in our work as well. So, what you see here is two things. There's the effort that we do. There's what we draw down through that effort. The effort on our part is the birurim that we do. The drawing down, the mitzvahs gives us that power because the mitzvahs carry the chsadim elyenim, like he said, which brings down the kedusha of godliness into this world. Asher kedushanu b'mitzvayse v'tzivanu. So what is the lesson to each of us when we learn this Pedic? Now we come to the conclusion, especially the last piece that we've just learned, is that we all engage with a world that has the divine concealed within it. Like the sparks within all matter, like the fruit within the husks. It is our work to not be distracted by that, but to align ourselves, our own focus, and to understand that the purpose is not the husk and the shell, but the spark within. When we work with that, we elevate it, and we elevate the material object itself. So in effect, what we're really doing is transforming existence. That, in essence, when you do it in the fullest sense of the word, like at Tzaddik Gomor, not in order to connect to God or to quench your own thirst, but in order just simply for one reason, to draw Elokus into this world. So that's the second part of the process. That after you do that work, in turn, what's drawn down is the Mayin Tchurin, comes into Tachtenim. So you see that the first interpretation of Bnei Aliyah, on that is dependent the second interpretation. But earlier we learned that it's actually the absolute love of the Tzaddik Gomer that causes also the rejection of the negative. So in truth, it works both ways. Both ways. First of all, the complete commitment to godliness ultimately has the power to also transform the negative. The transforming of the negative leads to a place of total commitment and total love of the Tzaddik Gomer. So the Tzaddik V'Tevle leads to the Tzaddik V'Gomer, and the Tzaddik Gomer leads to the Tzaddik V'Tevle. That's what you have to say when you finish the whole chapter, when you talk about both sides of the picture. And as I said, all of this applies to each one of us, each in our own way. Like we say, B'chol moedecha, moed shalcha. So everybody has their l'cha v'avcha b'chol nafshecha, b'chol moedecha, all your heart, all your soul, your spirit, and all your might. But moedecha is everything is relative. We all have these levels within us. Everything is relative. Obviously, the Alter Rebbe is talking in the broader sense. You're talking about actual tzaddikim, b'nei aliyah shehem mo'atim hem. And mo'atim here means because they're very rare. But you have now the whole picture of what it means to be a divine human being. The tzaddik gomer is the epitome of that. Completely consumed only with godliness. And only with the purpose of bringing God into this existence. The second interpretation, b'nei aliyah. Which you get to, so the first interpretation that who enters into the chamber of Rashbi, someone who transforms darkness to light and bitter to sweet. And with that we conclude chapter Perek Yud. So now, in the flow of the Parakim of Tanya, what you have is, the first Perek began the introduction, of course. Tanya b'Sheif Perek Gimel Denida, the establishment of the tzaddik, the beinoni, the rasha, the different levels. The questions the Alter Rebbe asked about all those aspects. Then began the end of chapter, the second half of chapter 1, the two nefashos. First, the end of chapter 1, nefesh habam is the animal soul. After that, you get to the divine soul in chapters 2. And chapter 3 is the faculties of the divine soul. Chapter 4 and 5, the garments of the divine soul. Then comes 6, 7, and 8 is l'umazeh, the animal soul, and its faculties, and its garments. And then at chapter 9, the battle between the two. And chapter 10 is the first manifestation of this battle in the world of the tzaddik that completely wins the battle. And in that itself, two levels, the tzaddik gomer and tzaddik sheina gomer, the tzaddik v'tevlei and the tzaddik v'ralei. And then the next chapter will be another manifestation, the other extreme, the rasha. The rasha v'tevlei and the rasha v'ralei, rasha gomer, rasha sheina gomer. And then chapter 12 and on will be the beinoni. So there you have the eloquent structure of the build-up of the two forces within us, the battle they fight, and the different ways we measure how that battle is concluded, or at least how that battle is dealt with. And the tzaddik gives us the picture. The first, Alter Rebbe began, of course, with the first one, which is the total victory, in the fullest sense of the word, with the tzaddik gomer be the ultimate. Tzaddik sheina gomer, a step below that, as we learned at length in this Perek Yud. And with that we'll conclude Perek Yud, and next week we'll begin Perek Yud Aleph. Everyone have a good tavach, a good week. Go to TanyaApplied.com where you can find this and all the programs as well as other resources. And you can also submit any question that you like. Be well, Kol Tov.
This has been My Life Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.